Bula Vinaka boxing fans, is Tyson Fury an elite heavyweight world champion, or is he simply overrated? That's going to be the topic for today's discussion, and that is off the back of a couple of Tyson Fury videos that I've done, which has had quite a number of responses or comments in my comment section where people have basically said Fury's rubbish, he's not going to make the fight, Usyk's going to win, Usyk's going to knock him out, Usyk's going to stop him, and all comments that I really appreciate, because it's really good to see people, giving their opinions on the fight, and it's created that interest. And I just wanted to make a video to talk about whether or not Fury is actually elite, and look back at some of Fury's performances and achievements, and to break it down and to get your thoughts around this. So Tyson Fury, he is an unbeaten world heavyweight champion, WBC lineal world heavyweight champion. He's a two-time world heavyweight champion. He has won every single belt in heavyweight boxing that there is, apart from probably the Central Area title, which he goes on about. I've never even heard of that. And I'm sure if he wanted to challenge for it, he would win that easily. But he's won every single belt. He's a two-time Ring Magazine champion, former Unified champion, and current WBC and current lineal world heavyweight champion. He's undefeated, as I've mentioned before. He's had one draw, which we all know that he actually won. Yes, he was dropped twice against Wilder, but apart from those two rounds, I don't see Wilder winning any other rounds, and it is a 12-round fight. It's not a 2-round fight. So he potentially won 10 out of those 12 rounds, and in the 12th round, he actually came back to win the rest of that round after being knocked down. So those are just some of his achievements. He also dethroned a 10-year unbeaten Vladimir Klitschko, and he defeated a 6-year unbeaten heavyweight monster in Deontay Wilder, who at the time was knocking everyone out. Knocked Dominic Breazeale, who, let's face it, he wasn't a world level fighter, but same Dominic Breazeale that Joshua had to take 7 rounds to break down and get him out, he basically blitzed him in 30 seconds. And also was the first person to defeat Luis Ortiz, who at the time before his fights was also looking quite strong and hadn't been defeated by any of the current crop of boxers. And heavily avoided was Luis Ortiz. So those are probably his two notable wins. He also had some really strong wins in the likes of Derek Chisora early on in his career, who was unbeaten at the time and was earmarked as probably the next good, solid British heavyweight. He beat him comfortably. He also beat Steve Cunningham, who was a former cruiserweight world heavyweight champion, and also beat Dylan White, who at the time had probably been a mandatory challenger for well over 1,000 days or whatever it was. Ridiculous that he had to wait. But at the time, Dylan White had some good momentum, avenged his loss against Povetkin, had some really, really good wins, and people had thought, Dylan White actually stood a chance. He went out and made that look easy and knocked Dylan White out with one punch. So those are some of his, really good fights. Some of his not so great fights were against, most recently, Francis Ngannou, a debutant, former UFC world heavyweight champion, went the distance, won a split decision. Many thought that Fury lost that fight. I actually had Fury winning personally, because if you're looking at boxing from a boxing standpoint, he outlanded total punches to Ngannou. And I think in the power punches, yes, Ngannou landed more power punches, but there wasn't a big gap in terms of how many more power punches Ngannou landed. So overall punches, was Fury. And you have to think that apart from the round that Ngannou dropped Fury, and I think it was the 8th round, he didn't really do much else. He was kind of just waiting to counterpunch while Fury was getting away his shots, and knew that he had to kind of back to fight on the back foot, otherwise he was going to get dropped or potentially stopped again. So that was a poor performance. The other poor performance was against Otto Wallin. And, you know, it's kind of, you can break this down in two. So it was a poor performance in the sense that he should never have let Otto Wallin cut him so early on the fight. And he shouldn't have been going life and death with someone like Otto Wallin, who we saw, you know, a couple of years later, Joshua absolutely blitz and make look, you know, ragdolled him. But he did suffer a massive cut. I think it was in round 3 or round 4, which some refs would have stopped that fight. But Fury showed his determination and grit to change his fighting style in the ring. He was trying to box Otto Wallin on his back foot, and then he basically decided he needed to change his whole game plan because that wasn't going to work once you've sustained a cut. So he just took the fight to Otto Wallin and made it a rough fight, mauling on the inside, holding, and he won. And he sold it really well to the doctors that he was still in it, he could still fight, even though the blood was just gashing out. It looked horrible. And he was very lucky not to have that fight stopped and lose on a technical knockout, because the cut was a punch. So that was really poor. I also thought his fight against Francisco Pianeta wasn't great. I mean, he kind of should have stopped him or got him out of there. It looked like he was just trying to get the rounds in boxing. So yeah, he's definitely had some poor performances and early on in his career, but you can't really fault him there. He was quite young. Was against John McDermott, the first fight. Many thought he actually lost that fight. Again, when I watched it back, I thought he did enough to win in terms of punches. McDermott probably threw the more effective punches. It really kind of depends on how you score the fight. But I mean, you know, the proof was in the pudding. In the second fight, he came out and absolutely put on a masterclass on John McDermott. So yeah, those two fights, I recommend going back and watching those because they were great. So you've had Fury obviously achieve all these things in his career. He can only fight who's in front of him, right? But I will say this, Fury is his own worst enemy. Now, why I say that is that when he gets into the ring eventually, he actually puts on a good performance. And when he isn't really putting on a good performance, he still finds a way to win. We've seen other great champions who, when they come into adversity, fold. Now, I like Anthony Joshua. I'm a big AJ fan. I think he's just awesome for boxing, a really good human being. But when he's faced with adversity at the highest level, we've seen him fold. We saw him fold against Andy Ruiz when he got hit on the temple. And we saw him basically clueless in the first Usyk fight. And then the second fight, whilst he was a lot better, still he couldn't take advantage on the good work that he did in, I think, round 9. And he basically ran out of gas or steam, which led to Usyk, finishing strong and winning the fight. When you look back to Fury, the fights where he's had adversity, you think back to the John McDermott fight, you think back to Deontay Wilder 1 being dropped twice by Wilder, who, when he drops you, he basically finishes you, and the ref stops it early. To go through the adversity he faced with Klitschko, I think later on in the fight, Klitschko started to land. I think he took a couple of left hooks and a right hand from Klitschko. And he was able to survive and still outbox him. And then more recently, Francis Ngannou, who we know is a noted puncher, and Fury looked completely out of shape, didn't look like he had trained. He can say all he wants around his training. He probably, what he meant by training was he was probably going out for his runs. I don't think he sparred or did any real fighting for that camp, lead up to that camp, and he was still able to manage to, edge out a win, albeit controversial. So, if Fury is not good, if he is not elite, then who in the current heavyweight division would you say is elite? Right. So I think Usyk is most definitely elite. I think there's no questions. He is definitely one of the best, if not the best, cruiserweight world champion I've seen in recent history, apart from Evander Holyfield. I still think a prime Evander Holyfield, who was unbeaten in cruiserweight, would have beaten Alexander Usyk, simply because he just has more. He had more pop, he had more power, and his inside fighting was just incredible. And I think he would have just absolutely, and he's faster, so much faster with his hands than Usyk. But at heavyweight, it might have been a different story. He sort of slowed down Holyfield at heavyweight, and Usyk, you can see, he's continued on. So Usyk is definitely elite for me. So apart from Usyk, then you've got obviously Fury, Joshua. So Joshua, I would say, is also elite. Whilst he's lost to only Usyk, he did lose to Andy Ruiz, but remember, he came back and avenged his loss, albeit Andy Ruiz not probably training at all for that fight. But that's not Joshua's fault. Joshua fought who was in front of him, and Andy Ruiz should have come in fit, but he chose to choose Taco Bell and Burger King over fighting to defend his unified world championship belts, should I say. Imagine that, winning and then losing on your first title defense. That must really, really hurt fighters, if I think back to some of the fighters in the past. So, if I'm looking at everything, do I think, given the caliber of opposition Fury's fought, what he's achieved, is he elite? 100% he is elite, in my opinion. Is he the best fighter in our generation? Or is he the best fighter in my generation growing up, and the best fighter in the heavyweight division in recent years? I would have to say no. He still hasn't proven that to me, in the sense that he needs to do what, for me, the best is Lennox Lewis. Whilst Lennox Lewis lost twice, both fights he avenged, and Lennox Lewis fought every single one that you can imagine. He fought Vitaly Klitschko, he fought Mike Tyson, Evander Holyfield, Shannon Briggs, Frank Bruno, Tommy Morrison. Gosh, I think he fought, there's probably more that I've missed, but he fought them all. The only one that he didn't fight, and he tried to fight, was Riddick Bowe. And Riddick Bowe avoided him as much as possible. So until Fury actually goes out and beats Alexander Usyk, beats AJ, potentially beats Hrgovic or Zhang, then we could probably make claim for Fury to be the best, if not the best, fighter in this generation. And especially if he does all of that without losing, then by far for me he's better than Lennox Lewis. If he loses maybe one or two fights but still ends up avenging and beating them, then you could say he's kind of there on par with Lewis. But to think that he's not good, and to think that he's not elite, I think that if that's true, then God help us with the heavyweight division at the moment. No one is elite then, Because Usyk is great. I mean, he's only fought Joshua, Chisora, and Dubois. And apart from Joshua, Dubois and Chisora would get beat by a lot of top heavyweights. In fact, there are 2 or 3 heavyweights that I believe who are not even on the radar. And I'm going to do a separate video around these heavyweights. The 3 future heavyweight stars, for me, who would beat Chisora, who would beat Dubois, and could beat Anthony Joshua even, is Bakadir Jalalov, should I say, Moses Atoma, and Jared the Big Baby Anderson. So Jared Anderson, whilst he had that fight against Charles Martin, I think there's something special about him, and we're going to see more of that on the 3rd of August, because he's actually got a fight coming up, and I'm going to do a separate video on that too, because Big Baby is finally coming to town, potentially going to fight Deontay, the Bronze Bomber Wilder. But leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Is Fury elite, or is he overrated, and why? Why do you think he's elite, or why do you think he's overrated? Thanks for all your support, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. Vinaka, vaka, levu.